What would you do to survive? It's a question that I asked myself a lot when I was a child. You see, like millions of other people in this country, growing up, I lived below the poverty line. My parents were really hard workers. They would work any job, any place that would require them to, that would help keep a roof over our heads and put food on the table. But the problem with poverty is that a lot of times, it's just not enough. I think that's why I was attracted to church in the first place. You see, church, when I was a kid, it was our salvation. Now, I don't mean in a spiritual or a metaphorical sense. It really, literally was. The church provided food when we needed it. It gave us money to pay our bills to keep the lights on. It created a sense of community that helped me feel like I had a place to grow up. I think that's why I decided to commit my life to working in churches. I realize that a lot of my colleagues, they go into church work because they're attached to a specific denomination or theology or idea. That wasn't the case for me. So I had the freedom to jump from one job to the other, from one church to another. And yes, for a little while, I was confused. But I started to see in each and every one of these churches, they would come to me and they would say, we really want to be relevant. We want to be engaging. We want to be impactful in our community. And so I would lay out a series of ideas and plans that they could use. And every single one of these churches, they would take a couple of those ideas and then they'd stop. Something about their system prevented them from moving forward to create actual change. I was really frustrated. I didn't know what that was. And so, like anybody else, when you get frustrated, I called a colleague and asked them if they would want to go to lunch with me. And I sat there and I was explaining everything to her. And she said, well, do you know what you need to do? And that was a thought that never crossed my mind. You see, I actually just wanted to sit and complain. I didn't actually want to have to do anything to fix the problem. She said, the problem is that you haven't considered the platypus. I said, okay, what does that mean? She said, well, back in the 80s and 90s, there was a common conception among neurobiologists and psychologists that the human brain was the most evolved brain. And the reason that they thought this was because there was a great groove between the left and the right hemisphere, and it was believed that that groove was greater than any other animal or mammal. Well, in the 90s, a new article came out that said that that was not true. That a number of other mammals, including the platypus, had a greater difference between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. In fact, the platypus is able to shut down one side of its brain and still use another. It can be asleep and awake. I said, okay, well, that's interesting, but what does that mean? She said, the thing that's interesting about that more than anything else is that the people who were researching this had to challenge a fundamental pillar of their field. I thought about that. How many of us are willing to make those challenges? How many of us are willing to challenge what it is that we believe? And so, for me, it was beginning to study evolution. As I read through and studied a number of evolutionary books, I came upon one person, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a Jesuit philosopher and priest who came from France into America in the early 1900s. He was a PhD in theology, but also a PhD in anthropology. He loved religion and science. And so when Darwin's Origin of the Species came out, he said it was the greatest book of his generation. He took the principles that Darwin said about evolution and survival and the process of growing, and he said this could be applied not just to animals or humans, but to ideologies. For Desjardins, it could be applied to religion, and for him, God itself would go through a process of survival and even evolution. That we exist through a series of time, but that ideologies and people are either surviving or challenged to change and evolve. It was an interesting concept, for me at least, because as I read it, I started to wonder how the Catholic Church responded. Well, the church responded as well as they could with anybody that's challenging the major systems they have. They told him to stop writing. They refused to publish any of his books, and they told him to stop teaching. What's interesting, though, is that over the course of the next 50 to 60 years, the church reversed its decisions. It came out and said that actually Desjardins' ideas of survival and evolution progressing through time have shaped so much of how we can understand ideology, religion, science, and all of humanity. I thought it was really interesting because the initial point that the Catholic Church engaged Desjardins, they were doing the exact same thing that he was critical of. They were more concerned with the doctrines and the dogmas of their survival that they wouldn't be challenged and pushed to evolve. They wouldn't take that next step until something forced them to. And I realized that this was true in each and every church that I worked at. They would be comfortable only going so far unless something really pushed them to have to evolve. And the more I started talking about this with more people, the more many of them started to say to me, you know what, it's not just the church. It's any organization, it's any institution, it's any business, it's any relationship, and as we've seen recently, it's any political party. We either stay in a mindset and a place where we think that survival is key. The reality is that survival is not even that hard. All that you have to do to survive is keep doing today what you did yesterday. If the resources are available to you, you'll keep going. But evolution is something greater. Evolution forces us to move beyond that. I've noticed there are at least a couple characteristics of surviving systems and evolving systems. Surviving systems love to talk about the past. If you've ever been in an organization or a place where somebody introduces themselves to you and the next thing they say is how long they've been there, you know you're in a surviving system. Surviving systems love to look at the things that used to work and believe that they can work again. They ignore the idea that these ideas and these situations don't happen in a vacuum. They have this notion that perhaps because this was successful yesterday, if we do it again today, it will yield the same results. But it doesn't. Finally, surviving systems love to purge outside and critical voices. And this is probably the most common thing that we see. Anytime a new individual or somebody with innovative thought comes into an organization or a system, a church, a business, and they have all these great ideas, what happens? Either within a couple of weeks or months or even a year, they become frustrated. And they either adapt to the system or they leave. But we started to see that there are places, there are organizations and systems and businesses, and yes, even political systems and parties that are moving to an evolved state, that are evolving themselves. And the state of evolution for them means to challenge those past assumptions. Evolving systems are willing to challenge even the major pillars of what they have, of what their organization has always known. Take a look at Amazon and Borders. You have an institution, organization that said people are never going to stop reading books on paper and went bankrupt. And you had another organization that said we have a different way that people can see how they're going to read in the future. Evolving means being willing to challenge what that pillar is in your organization, in your relationships, in your systems. Evolving institutions also have very simple goals, the kind that could fit on a baseball cap, that everyone can understand and know and see and apply and buy into. More than that, evolving systems are willing to listen to critical voices, the critical voices that are willing to challenge them, that are willing to push against them, that are willing to say that the things that worked yesterday are not the things that are going to help you work tomorrow. So what are you going to do? Which system do you belong in? Which system are you working in? Will you change and challenge? Will you evolve? Perhaps the question that I asked at the beginning isn't the fair one. Maybe the question shouldn't be what would you do to survive, but what would you do to evolve? Because if we learned one thing this past week, when we woke up on Wednesday morning, it is that it doesn't matter how much you ignore it, how much you fight against it, or how much you plan for it. Evolution is here, and it's all around us.